Welcome everyone to today's panel discussion on new venture financing. My name is Lauren DeJambry. I'm the Assistant Dean of College Relations and Development here at the College of Chemistry at UC Berkeley, and it's my great pleasure to introduce today's talk. Today's talk is part of a new initiative that we call Berkeley Ecosystems, where you can learn, explore, and connect with Berkeley faculty, alumni, students, and industry innovators on relevant topics. This fall, we have two more faculty talks coming up, one by Peidong Yang on liquid sunlight, and one by Ting Zhu on biodegradable plastics. We also will have one more panel discussion coming up on new developments in cancer therapy, featuring both some of our star faculty and alumni. We hope you'll register for these upcoming events in the link provided in the chat or later at ecosystems.berkeley.edu. Now for a few logistical matters regarding today's talk. Today's talk will be recorded, as were all past events. In the coming days, we'll have this posted on our site at ecosystems.berkeley.edu. And we invite you to explore this talk, but also others that we've already recorded. We are planning to field questions today at the end of the talk. So please use the Q&A function as opposed to the chat function to share any thoughts or questions of our speakers. And finally, directly following our event, you'll receive a short survey. Please take a minute to complete that survey, giving us feedback on today's talk, but also on future topics that you might want to hear in a future Berkeley Ecosystems event. And now it is my great honor to introduce today's panel discussion on new venture financing and our facilitator, Walter Moos. Walter Moos is a co-founder and managing director of Pandect BioVentures. Walter is also emeritus chairman of Shang Pharma Innovation, which is the venture incubator ecosystem he and his colleagues established in South San Francisco in 2016. Previously, he served as president of biosciences at the Stanford Research Institute, that other university down the south part of the Bay, where he was there for more than a decade. In parallel, he has served on the faculty of the University of California of San Francisco since 1992. From the 80s to the 2000s, he's held executive roles in pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, including, there's a bunch here, Warner, Lambert, Park Davis, that is now owned by Pfizer, Chiron, that's now owned by Novartis, and Mitocor, that's now owned by Muganex. Walter has served on a number of boards and as an advisor to government and nonprofit organizations, and as an industry consultant on several continents. Walter received his undergraduate and graduate degrees in chemistry from Harvard and of course here at UC Berkeley. Thank you, Walter, for facilitating today's discussion.
Thank you, Lo, and welcome to all of our viewers. I'd like to start our discussion today by asking each of our other panelists to introduce themselves and to provide us with a brief overview of their backgrounds, touching on your affiliation with Berkeley, your current job role, and how you got into finance or VC. Let's start off with Roseanne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rosanna Winsek. I am a 04 graduate from the College of Chemistry, and then I was a member of the class of 05 in the biophysics graduate group, but I dropped out and left without my PhD. I am a tech investor today, so I am one of the co-founders and managing directors of Renegade Partners. We're an early stage venture firm based in the Bay Area. We're investing out of $100 million Fund 1 that we raised last year. Prior to Renegade, I spent 5 years at a late stage venture firm called IVP. And prior to that, I was at Keenan Partners that does tech and healthcare. I sat on the tech team, but would occasionally pinch hit on healthcare deals. I got into venture after business school that I attended on the other side of the Bay, and kind of between graduate school and business school, I actually dropped out of my PhD to start a company that made Facebook apps in the crazy Facebook app days, which is what you do with half a PhD in biophysics. And then I went to a company called NextBio that was eventually acquired by Illumina, where I did product. And that was a really great kind of stepping stone for me because it was a true tech job, but I had been my customer. And so I could work with our scientific team, really talk to our customers in a different way than a typical product manager. It was there that I learned about venture. And I always joke that I think that venture is kind of like the academia of tech. You kind of, you have multiple projects, building mental models, trying to figure out, how to test your hypotheses, but instead of pipetting, I got to talk to people. So it's just a better fit for my personality. And today I really focus squarely on technology. So mostly consumer and enterprise. I sit on the board of companies like Masterclass, Nate, which is a Gen Z payments company. I previously invested in Looker, Keep Truckin'. I'm about to join the board of a video API company. So really pretty straight down the fairway tech, but I occasionally make healthcare personal investments like Orca Biosciences, who is my best friend from graduate school, and Trey Therapeutics, which is a friend from business school that's funded some technology out of City of Hope.
Thank you, Roseanne. What a great background for today's discussion. It sounds like you're having fun too. Stefan, your background, please.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. I'm Stefan Lauren, and I started life as a scientist as well. I started as a chemist, undergraduate from UC San Diego, and then a graduate degree in chemistry, my PhD from Berkeley. I'm a third generation Berkeley grad. And from that standpoint, we have a long family history there. I worked with Professor Joel Hawkins for my PhD, went on to Scripps, worked with Barry Sharpless at Scripps, and then on to Abbott Laboratories for my pharmaceutical career. And then early on, and it's actually a rather funny story, I had, as an accident, had a rather heated discussion at a poster session for a biotech company at the time, where I was disagreeing with someone about how the statistics were essentially calculated. At the end of about a 10-minute discussion, I got a tap on my shoulder, and it turned out to be somebody who offered me a free lunch, if I would explain to him what I was saying. And he was a hedge fund manager. It was the first I ever had contacted anybody on Wall Street. And at the same time, I had an opportunity to do some work and got very interested in Wall Street that way. About a year later, I was on Wall Street as a healthcare analyst at a company called Legg Mason. The Legg Mason has been sapped up by Franklin Investments at this point, but headed their healthcare group actually for about 10 years there. Went from there to manage money at a company called MTB Investment Advisors, a long-only fund, very stodgy, very conservative New York firm, and had a great opportunity to both invest in the energy space and the healthcare space, became a little bit broad. And from there, I was snapped up by a hedge fund in New York called Perceptive Advisors, and had a great opportunity to learn from one of the best investors, in my opinion, in the world, Joe Edelman there. And went everywhere from pan healthcare, early stage, private company, public companies, and that's where I sort of got the bug. Did some as well, spun out my own hedge fund after that and managed money for a number of years, and then decided I had a little bit of time left and I was going to go back and do something that was a little bit more travel and a little bit different, and that was investment banking. That's where I am now with Oppenheimer & Company. I am a managing director in the healthcare investment banking group. I work on mergers and acquisitions. I work on capital raises, everything right now from Series A, company founding, all the way through to IPOs. We're working on 2 as we speak right now, and that's why I'm here in San Francisco. And then after that, we also do the M&A cradle to grave, we like to say. So that's my background. That's how I got into the unlikely pathway. It was more of a random walk, I would say, getting to where I am. But I would say that my background as well, for the chemistry background, I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, really dovetailed well. So, Walter, back to you.
Another wonderful background for the discussion today. And Stefan and I have actually crossed paths a number of times over the last more than a couple of decades. And I can tell you he's one of the real stars of the finance scene. You know, it's really fascinating that we're all scientists and we're now all very much involved in finance and venture capital. You know, 2 of us went on to supplement our undergraduate degrees with PhD, namely myself and Stefan. And another went to the dark side, as the life science people might say, but I'm sure there's more than one point of view on that, and got an MBA somewhere down in the south part of the Bay. So it makes me wonder about a number of things. First of all, perhaps for this audience, how do you feel that your scientific background helps you in your current role? in helping finance and support early to mid-stage startups? And how does your PhD or your MBA help you? And some of that, I'm sure, will come out in very clear terms from Stefan. If you could start this discussion, that would be great.
My pleasure. So I, on a daily basis, use not only the information I got from chemistry, but also as important or more important to me is the whole thought process that I came out with during the PhD process, learning from the professors at Berkeley, learning in just being at the bench. I do a lot of due diligence on a daily basis. Part of what my job is to do is to find new technologies for other companies to acquire, for people to invest in. And we at Oppenheimer manage somewhere in the range of about 100 and I think it's $20 billion at this point. And to try and find suitable investments that we can present to the high net worth individuals that we deal with as well. So from that standpoint, it's been just a boon for me because on a daily basis, it's my job to go in and talk to chief medical officers, chief scientific officers about what they're doing, try and make sometimes a too quick judgment, other times deep due diligence, whether or not it's something that would be good for us to pursue, to devote a lot of time and to present to potential clients as a good opportunity. There's a lot of folks out there that do what I do. And what we try to do, you're either first or you're best. We try to be best. We try to really curate the opportunities that we give to people to make sure that we're right a lot more often than we're wrong. And from that standpoint, that's why we've been successful, I think, at Oppenheimer. Throw it back to you.
That's great, Stefan. Roseanne, you want to add to that?
Definitely. I think I probably use a lot less of the subject matter on a daily basis than Stefan does. But I think what I learned the most and what I use constantly are really like the mental models and the probabilistic thinking. My graduate work, I worked with Susan Marquesi and Ha Yang, who's now at Princeton. And I worked on protein folding and just thinking, a lot of the coursework was in, thermodynamics, statistical mechanics. And like, I use that kind, the world is an energy landscape to me. And I'm always looking for, what are companies that are building these, either, able to build these low energy states that they can take advantage of that others can't, or, lowering activation energies, thinking, I would use that a lot, thinking about, customer acquisition and how products are built and how you can lower those barriers to make it really easy and really engaging for your customer or your user. But the science training has really shaped the way that I think, and especially actually like in our firm, we use a lot of decision science. We work with a woman named Annie Duke, who was she was a professional poker player. Now she's a decision scientist, and she's in Phil Tetlock's lab. And we use a lot of that kind of like super forecasting and decision science in our own kind of decision making, because all a venture firm is a bunch of people who sit around and make decisions. And so how do we actually try to be rigorous and scientific about the way that we do it? To touch on my MBA, I think, from an academic standpoint, it's definitely not as rigorous. For me, what it was really great and amazing, I was actually just with friends last night talking about this, that, just gives you so much exposure to the breadth of businesses. And, I think at the end of the day, what gets me kind of most interested and excited is just like kind of businesses themselves and what makes them work, and applying all these different tools and ideas and mental models to new business models and technology. And so kind of getting to be a student of that and getting that broad exposure was really helpful. But I remember also when I was in business school, I took some writing class where the professor kept bemoaning the fact that I was a scientist. He's like, "Oh, you want an answer. You just don't want to make an argument. Like you actually want to like back things up, not just argue one side." And I'm like, duh, of course.
Yeah, very interesting. So both of you are saying, how you organize your mind, how you look at a problem, how you address it. For myself, I also do a lot of technical due diligence on companies before we invest. You have to ask, does the chemistry make sense? And similarly, the perspectives of biology and medicine. And of course, you can ask experts to opine on all of this, but can you have a productive back and forth with the experts? And if you look at this, there are so many aspects of STEM education that fit into the everyday practice for investors, for bankers, and for the team. Science, technology, engineering, and math sums it up pretty well. And Stefan, I think you were going to say something more.
Yeah, this dovetails into what Roseanne was saying. One of the interesting things that bridged the gap for me as well is I actually do a lot of Monte Carlo modeling at this point. And I love the fact that you are using decision science, because I've been a student of behavioral finance now for about 30 years as well. And it comes into and feeds its way into almost everything that we do to have a better idea about valuations, upside and downside, and risk. I think one of the things that many people don't have a good grasp on is real risk. And as scientists, thinking in the way of understanding, well, what's the upside? What's the downside? What's the probability of each spread, allows us to make better decisions, and does actually a much better job. And quite frankly, the only group I've ever seen that analyzes these things better than scientists are the actuaries, because this is what they eat and breathe every day. And I happen to have a brother who's an actuary, so that's how I found that out. And he's a lot better at it than I am. But one of the things is, again, for our business, it's all about not being right all the time. It's being right more of the time, and to use a poker analogy, betting more when you have a higher probability of being right. Sorry to interrupt.
That's great. Roseanne, did you want to add anything more to that?
No, I mean, spot on. We actually do a ton of Monte Carlo simulations on our, that's how we actually do our portfolio construction, and especially for like follow-on and investments. And it's a lot of fun. It's super fun for me, because I get to kind of pull back to, or kind of harken back to stuff that I actually learned at Berkeley, and actually learned in the classroom about how these things work. But it's again, it's you mentioned actuaries. I just think the first thing that popped into my head is oh, now we're throwing all this crazy stuff at them, right? With just thinking about how are you supposed to underwrite weather events today, when your base rates are completely all over the place. And that feels very similar to us when we're in this crazy market, and there's so much capital flowing in, and bigger prices and bigger outcomes than anybody has ever seen. And so how do you actually decide those underlying base rate? Do you actually use the past, or how do you actually think about the future, and kind of thinking about the risk and downside and all of that? And really all of that is just statistical mechanics, right?
So all you need is a degree from Berkeley, and you can figure all this out, right?
It's really amazing how many of my peers at this point are Berkeley PhDs. So I was out with one last night here in SF, and I am finding more and more people, chemistry, biology, physics, that are out in the finance space. And I think it's finally really understood that really there are multiple sets of thinking that we need in our industry. And by having a mold MBA, for example, only with a business background is not the right way to approach problems. You need a group of people to really come at it with different answers. And Berkeley in particular, I think a lot of the graduate students, at least my experience in the chemistry program, were extremely entrepreneurial. And from that standpoint, they weren't afraid to put the blinders on. You go into pharma, you go into straight chemistry. They weren't afraid to jump and move over. So it's, again, I think it's a lot of what we were taught in the PhD program and in the graduate program.
So great discussion so far. Maybe we could change gears now and talk a bit about the new venture space. So here's a question on that front. What are some of the scientific innovations or translation of ideas and technologies into marketable solutions that most excite you today? Roseanne, do you want to start that off?
So actually, I feel like that's probably a better question for Lauren. We don't spend a lot of time investing in science, and so when I joined Canaan, actually what I really learned was I had a life science background coming into Canaan, right? I had been in a venture-backed, life science company, like it was a software company, but, we sold to Illumina. Our investors were healthcare investors, my experience at Berkeley. And I got to Canaan, and it was very eye-opening that, while I understood the science, actually like that style of investing was very different. For instance, like I had friends, I would get, healthcare deals sent to me, and really at the early stage, healthcare investing is a lot about like identifying and underwriting how much it's going to take to hit endpoints, right? And if you actually, you could have, I remember this was very eye-opening to me, like a friend sent me a company where like the endpoints were just, I was not aware they were just super amorphous. And one of the healthcare partners spent a lot of time with me on this and showed me that, it would cost like $500 million for them to hit the endpoint they were talking about. And like, that it was a less exciting like from an investment point of view, even though the scientific idea was really compelling. And so I've really become in that time, like a student of technology. And so, the things that I get excited about on the trend side there are really more around like, ways that people are interacting, with their phones, with each other on their phones. Video is an area where I spend a ton of time because I think, COVID and things like Zoom have opened this up, but it's kind of strange that we, spend all of our days in a browser, yet we, only communicate through an app that just does that one thing. So those are the trends that I spend more time on, even though they're less scientific.
Well, less scientific, but we talked about quantitative earlier, and people get called quants because most of their analysis is quantitative. But there's this more qualitative assessment and interaction, which is very important in daily lives for all of us and for all of the listeners. And we call those people quals, right? And the really talented, successful people that I've seen are the people who can bridge the quantitative and the qualitative. And I saw this in spades when I was at SRI, when we were starting things like Siri, which is a very different approach than one would take with a biotech company. And just amazing what can come out of those discussions and technologies. Stefan, do you want to wade into this?
Yeah, I'll jump in with a few of the technologies. Looking forward, and I see a few things happening. I think everything old is new again. So I look in the cancer space, the antiviral space. I'm looking at a lot of technologies that are coming up now for understanding protein structure, but protein structure in real time, not an X-ray crystal structure necessarily, but cryomicroscopy that's actually allowing a lot of drug targets that used to be called undruggable, things that we couldn't do. All of a sudden we can drug them. We can understand more about the structure, look for different spots, allosteric spots on the protein to interact. I see that as a tremendous set of advancements that are becoming more and more commonly used now to enable the next generation of drugs. And I'll stick with the life sciences area first to really move forward and create some new therapies. I think digital therapeutics are actually quite interesting, and people may say, what's a digital therapeutic? Well, there's actually a few FDA-approved therapies on the cell phone now. Gone through, they use cGMP coding, and for depression, neurological issues as well, that actually have the opportunity to help people. And to get back to what Roseanne was saying as well, utilizing things that we have with us every day and to enable them to do more. In the case of depression, in the case of in helping patients really not necessarily pop a pill and have something, but help patients help themselves. There's a lot of opportunity there as well. This is a buzzword and everybody's going to laugh when I say it, but AI is something that I heard about when I was at Abbott. Okay, AI, we're going to be able to run clinical trials. We're going to be able to, basically, you're not going to need chemists anymore because there's going to be an output from a computer. Well, we found that didn't happen during, at least probably not during my lifetime, but the technology is getting good enough that it's a real tool now to help people essentially shrink the timing of getting a drug to market. Getting a drug to market is very expensive. And we need to not only make it cheaper, we need to shrink the time. We've got right now a lot happening in, for those of you that follow Washington, HR 3 is coming up right now, and it is looking like the government wants to kill the pharmaceutical companies at this point with the reimbursement that's in this particular bill. Now, I'm not so sure it's going to happen as written, but from that standpoint, if that happens, pharmaceutical industry definitely is going to need to undergo yet another transformation. Better, faster, cheaper. We're going to need to bring it back, and we're going to have logical reimbursement as well. So tools to help the industry and actually healthcare in general more appropriately price drugs, I think, is something that we're going to need. We need to understand what the value really is. And right now we use old-fashioned tools. You go over to Europe, they actually calculate what a life is worth, which is, to us in America, sounds draconian. But I think there needs to be better technologies, and those are coming over the horizon for understanding real value that comes out of the therapies that we take. I know this is sort of disparate areas, but these are the exciting areas I'm looking at as the next. I think people may have expected me to talk about CRISPR or other technologies or CAR-T, but from that standpoint, I view those as being here. I'm looking for the next. That's what we're trying to do, especially for those companies that we want to work with on Series A's.
That's great, Stefan. To the drug pricing, there's an interesting new initiative, No Patient Left Behind, and an extensive letter that's gone out to Congress from that group, something that people who are listening might want to look at. As to technologies, you didn't mention CRISPR. Well, you did mention CRISPR. You just said you weren't going to talk about it. I will say that we are looking at some gene editing technologies using the latest approaches that are CRISPR or CRISPR-like. And of course, Nobel Prize went to Berkeley's Jennifer Doudna, so it's very appropriate to mention that here. We're also looking not at CAR-Ts, but CAR-Bs, B-cell therapies that could be the next generation beyond what you've seen with T cells. And B cells and T cells and all of this immunity type discussion is something that's going on in households around the country and around the world these days because of COVID-19. So a lot that one can possibly do there, which leads me to RNA-based therapies, which we are also looking at. What's the next generation there, looking to the future, and again, household word these days. Finally, you mentioned artificial intelligence, and you have to wonder how intelligent it is at times. And all of the companies that are out there, I think we've only seen one or two that we thought really started to address what you need in drug discovery and clinical development. I think it's additive right now, but you want it to be exponential in terms of what it can possibly do. And I think that's still somewhere in the future.
Let me jump in as well with a comment along those lines as well. The one thing that we've seen, again, early stage, and as an investor, I'm going to go back and put my investor hat on for a second. When you talk about CAR-Ts, when you talk about cellular therapies, which do have a tremendous chance to change medicine, I look back and I ask, what's really interesting there? Well, one of the problems is, how do you solve the problems that those companies have? And it's manufacturing. We're back again to the run-of-the-mill type things, but new manufacturing technologies. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of the failures of these companies are very simple. They can't make it at scale. And it doesn't look like they will be able to make these things at scale for quite a bit of time. So the clinical trials slow down. And as an analyst looking in and saying, what could this possibly be worth? What's that upside? It caps the upside. And so I look at, I guess, from the gold rush, you talk about the people who made the real money were the ones with the picks and the axes, selling those and the genes, providing the tools to those. That's also an interesting area that sometimes gets forgotten about. So I would urge people to look in that area as well, because it's one of the things that we're looking at very carefully as well.
Roseanne, I'd like to change gears again here and ask you about what you see as the biggest challenge or opportunity for early stage startups to successfully scale up to reach their critical size. And your firm talks about the supercritical stage of a startup. So what exactly do you mean by that? And how do you help startups through this important stage?
Yeah, definitely. So, what we're seeing today, like I mentioned earlier, like there's, more capital in the market than ever before. There's more companies being started. These companies are growing faster than ever before. And that's amazing, right? That's an incredible opportunity. But at the same time, that creates a new set of challenges. When I entered tech, it was the beginning of seed, right? Like seed was now a thing. And we saw that this class of firms that stood themselves up to go after this idea that you could go raise, a couple $100,000 and start a company and be off to the races, right? Because of AWS and mobile and Facebook and all this infrastructure, like it was very cheap to get started. The firms that started to attack that, that opportunity and the set of problems that go along with that opportunity became like, the next generation of winners, right? That's Andreessen Horowitz and Founders Fund and First Round and great firms. So when we were starting our firm, our big question was like, what has changed, right? And what's the new opportunity, and what are the new set of issues that go along with that, right? And so, the opportunity today is that, companies can be bigger than ever, right? Like we have $4 trillion companies and they're all venture-backed tech companies, right? Like, it used to be a big deal to be $1 billion IPO. Now, if you're like, unless you're like a $10 billion IPO, like nobody even really cares, right? It's, Spotify, Stripe are $100 billion companies, right? Like the scale is massive. But that also means that the pressure to reach that scale is huge. And so what we were seeing is that, companies are raising more money at faster clips and hiring more people. And, what we call the supercritical stage is kind of, we kind of like to joke that these companies are kind of in this like teenage stage, right? They're not yet early stage companies, but they have some features of an early stage company. They're not growth companies, but they do have some growth stage features themselves. And it kind of felt like a supercritical fluid where it's, where we kind of have some features of liquid and gas at the same time. And so that was the term that we decided to use, and as a nod to my, chemistry background. And so really what we focus on specifically is, helping our companies prepare to scale. So we don't think about a specific round of capital because the letters don't really mean that much anymore. We think about kind of more company stage. So call it $1 million a year to $1 million a month, 20 to 100 employees that are raising rounds between 10 and $50 million. And, in the very early days of a company, as the CEO, you're hiring everybody, everybody's name, right? And then you get to a point generally around, 40, 50 people where you're not even interviewing some of the folks that join the team anymore. You don't know everyone. You're now having, people are now becoming managers, and often they're becoming the manager of a team because they're the first one on that team, not because they're the best manager on that team, right? And you're having to bring in, as you grow, you're able to access different levels of executives and different levels of talent, and how you bring in new folks while keeping, the people who have gotten to you to where you are that, are a whole lot of the magic of the company. Those are really tough problems. And so really like that is what we focus on. Because the truth is today is if you get to a certain point, from a company, if you reach a certain scale of revenue, like you can go and raise hundreds of millions of dollars, but deploying that is actually really difficult, right? And the fact that there's so much capital in the system today means that, like, frankly, access to capital is no longer a competitive advantage, right? Like if there's some flashy company, it used to be that the number one in the category had like way more access to capital than its competitors, but that's not true anymore, right? Like, I mean, I remember last year earlier this year, there was one day where there were 3 neobanks, like 3 new banks that focus on teens. They each announced like rounds of between $100 and $200 million on the exact same day, right? Like the 1, 2, and 3 in that category all had access to capital, right? And so when capital is abundant, like execution, like the onus goes on to execution, right? That really is what becomes scarce. And at the end of the day, that's the teams. And so our whole practice is focused on, helping our CEOs, build executive teams around them. We do all this founder role design, kind of figuring out what they should own, what they should hire away, team structure, compensation. How do we also like create companies that are great employers and have great outcomes for everyone? Not just those that joined really, really early, or not just those at the top, right? How do we actually create wealth creation, across the company? And how do we prepare to go become that company that, raises $100 million and deploys it really effectively? Like, I think a lot about, kind of a startup is like to me, a startup's like a machine that's like trying to build a business, right? And you're kind of investing in that like machine of how good they are at running experiments and like knowing what's working and figuring out what's not. and reacting to the market and pivoting and being creative. And, at the same time, like at the beginning, they're that kind of machine to build a company, and then they transform into this like machine to build an organization. And so really like, how do we help them at that point, and and help them just become really effective employers and consumers of capital.
If I can add a couple of things, one of the things I would say, and this is exactly why you want venture capital money in your firm. We see a lot of firms that have come up with high net worth individuals, done multiple rounds, and in a hot market, they're still getting public. But at the end of the day, the quality of the company usually is nowhere near what the quality of the company is that's been coached along the way by a venture capital group. That's number one. Number two is they not only bring in the know-how, and they've seen this before and know, understand, they also bring in the network. And so access to capital along the way, from the standpoint of being able to get the right people in, and get essentially the company ready for the public markets, it's a completely different story. And what happens with a lot of founders of smaller companies as they're doing their Series A, they look at, oh, I'm going to have to give up so much of my company to go with this funding. But in the end, I'm going to tell you, much more often than not, you'll make more money. Even though you own less of the company, you're going to make more money in the long term, because your stock price is going to be higher when you're public. You're going to get public earlier. You're not going to run off the road from the classic mistakes that so many people make. Is that having the good VC involvement there's just no substitute for it. Sorry to have an advertisement here, but that's what we see on our side as folks who then have to pick up the pieces sometimes and refinance these companies and do the rebuilds. One of the things I didn't mention, I've served on multiple boards of directors, but in general, if you're a company, you usually don't want me, because I've been brought in by dissident shareholders to fix it. And in every case, it's been because activists have put me on boards, and it actually been some pretty big activist groups that have done that in the life sciences areas. And by that time, had they had adult supervision, that's how I like to put it, early on in their lives, it probably would have been much different story. So, there's a lot to be said for the fact that you can come in and you can right off the bat, you've got a high net worth office, or you've got a couple of friends that are willing to value you at a $500 million valuation for your technology that's just now ready to move out of the lab. But at the end of the day, you're going to pay for it at one point in your lifespan. Might as well take it early and have all the benefits for the rest of the life, rather than having to just take the final cut later on and hurting some of your investors along the way. So.
Great insights from both Roseanne and from Stefan. I mentioned earlier, the quantitative and the qualitative aspects, and teams came up here, which is a more qualitative sort of thing. And a colleague who's at the Berkeley Catalyst Fund, which grew out of the College of Chemistry and has strong ties to Cal, would tell you that the four main drivers of success in both tech and biotech would be team, number one, market opportunity, number two, technology, three, and the syndicate of investors, four. And everything else, I think, pales in comparison to that. And my own personal perspective on this is that I look for entrepreneurs who don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Basically, their ego is in check, because there are a lot of smart people. I look for people who have strong opinions, but loosely held. They're willing to change those ideas, after finding out what other people have to say. And people who think that the difficult can be done immediately, and that the impossible takes only a little bit longer, something my dad used to say all the time. And especially in healthcare, people who want to do well by doing good. I think that's probably true of most people, but in our profession, this really means saving lives, and every life saved is a miracle. And that's something that everybody can get behind. Any further thoughts on this topic before we move on to another?
Yeah, I think a few of the things that go hand in hand with that is, when we look at management, some of the things that are very important to us, as you said, team is very important. And it's having an attitude where there's not a lot of sharp elbows. We don't like to see cutthroat type environments. Usually we like to see collaboration. And I think that's an important thing, that in many cases really isn't taken to heart at certain companies, and more often than not, your talent will leave you if that's the case. But I think that's my final thought on the subject.
I mean, I just think you're so right that, you know, so much comes down to team and kind of that mindset and culture. But, you know, because at the end of the day, all of this is so hard, right? Like starting a young company and running and managing a young company is so hard, right? And so it's going to be difficult. It's never going to be perfect, right? Like there are going to be culture issues. There are going to be, you know, people who aren't the right fit or who were great and you know, are no longer scaling. Like, so it's really, to me, and it's, you know, I think the trust component is just so massive, and working with people that you can really trust to do the right things when things are hard. You know, I feel so lucky because when I was an associate, like on one of the first deals I ever worked on and came to the board meetings on, it was this founder who had founded a company that's today, you know, he was one of the co-founders of a company that's today public, and he had been pushed out because he was a terrible guy. And, you know, but he had this new company and the tech was really amazing and all of these things. And the reference calls were horrible, right? And like he did everything that the references told us he would do, right? And you know, my firm we'd done the deal anyway, and it was such a great experience for me too, because it was miserable, it was painful, right? And the company ended up being a zero, and that guy ended up getting fired. And I mean, we had like a lawyer kicked him off a conference call once because he was breaking the law, not being a fiduciary to his company. I mean, it was really bad. And, you know, for me, the big lesson was like, it's the Maya Angelou thing of like, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. But like at the end of the day, like all of this is so hard. So, you know, it's all about finding people that have like, you can really trust and are high integrity, and things are going to go hard, or going to be hard. And like, no company is perfect, and there's going to be bumps in the road. But like, at the end of the day, if it's, you know, people who are right, strong opinions, loosely held, and just want to get better and just want to win and want to win for everyone, like that's who you want to work with. Because also in this, life is too short, right, to work with people that are terrible. And at the end of the day, like that's all these companies are teams, right? And so you can't stress it enough.
You know, in listening to this discussion and participating in it, you know, the Berkeley Haas School of Business has what they call defining leadership principles, which kind of sum up all of this about as simply as one can. And 4 principles, I think, go something like, first, question the status quo. Second, have confidence without attitude. Third, always be students, right? I mean, keep learning. And the last one is beyond yourself. You know, it's not just about you, right? It's about the team. It's about all of the people that are going to benefit from whatever it is you're developing. You know, I think a very clear and simple way of thinking about things.
No, and it just comes back to culture. And I think, as was said, is that sometimes if you've got the wrong person up top or even inside, one has to be very mindful that one bad apple does in fact spoil the whole bunch, because a single bad apple can cause a number of folks to leave. We were talking to actually a VC I was out to dinner with 2 nights ago, and they were talking about why he left. They had actually hired somebody into the firm, and next thing you know, 4 of the senior people decided to leave afterwards. So it's the same for companies. It's very important to have a cultural fit, but don't be afraid to do something about it if it's not a fit. At some point, you just have to rip the Band-Aid off.
So all this discussion kind of leads into another question. So as financiers of startups, if financiers is the right term here, we all serve on a number of boards, and that's come up in some of the discussions so far. But let's put a finer point on what roles and responsibilities you all feel that we have when we're a financier or a board member of startups that we're investing in or advising. Who would like to start?
Do you want me to jump in?
Sure.
I'm happy
Sure.
to. So I have a a very, I think, a little bit different view because, as I said, I've served on boards that I've been brought on by dissidents. My feeling is this, though, and just to let you know, I am certified in governance from the other UCLA, and have done a lot of work in this space. But my feeling is pretty simple, is that a board is not there, and people disagree with me on this, just to let you know. Board is not there to run the company. A board is there to represent the shareholders, number one, to support the management, and to be a fiduciary check on the management, just to make sure that they're A, not running off the rails, B, to help them when they need help, to help them network, help them find the capital they need, and to serve as a resource for them. It's also obviously, and sometimes it's to be an independent police force. Yes, that happens. But for a normal board, it's basically to try to make the management work as best as they can, and to help them along that road. There's one of the issues, I think, I call it it's an 80-20, the whole Pareto thing, is that I'd say a lot of board members aren't really as involved as they should be. And one of the issues by that, I mean, is that they'll show up to a meeting, have never read a thing, show up and just start talking, or worse, show up to take a check. One of the issues that's a major issue right now is board diversity. And California's taken the lead in that space, actually requiring, NASDAQ is following suit. And it comes back to a comment I made earlier, is that you never want all the same opinion. You need multiple opinions. And just in decision-making, you find out that if you have a bunch of people with the same point of view, you're always going to lemming off the cliff, basically, is that you're going to herd and you're not necessarily going to make the right decision. And by having broader board diversity, it's not just morally the right thing to do, it's financially the right thing to do. And the fact that people are just waking up to this after all this time is from my standpoint, a little strange, but diversity of thought and diversity is very important. And as board members now, and as in the boards that I'm on, we've been very concerned with this, and have been over the last few years adding other voices and underrepresented voices, which is just a very important thing to do from multiple aspects.
Very
Sorry,
important
I'm
point.
off my soapbox now.
Rosanna, do you want to follow on that?
Yeah, definitely. I also have a different point of view, because I have never been brought on to a distress board as an activist or to represent an activist. So it's quite different, but a lot of the same things, right? Like, as an investor, you're not running the company in any way, shape, or form, right? And like, we also, like, I think a lot about like layers of abstraction, right? It's like, our company, our CEOs know their one company really, really well, right? And I have the ability that I get to know, a dozen companies quite well, never as well as them, but I get to see, the commonalities across them and the trends. And so really, like, your role is to be the best person you can at that kind of higher level of abstraction, right? Like, what actually helps there. Often these CEOs are running the biggest, every day you wake up and you're running the biggest company you've ever run, right? Like, if your company is growing. And so, how can you, support somebody by showing, like, by, helping them know what's 2 clicks ahead of them? How can you, like, bring in the folks that you see that they're missing? And how do you, both, it's funny, like, kind of be that, making sure that everybody's honest, everybody's hitting their numbers, but at the same time that they're like thinking big and broadly enough. One of my best performing entrepreneurs she's amazing, but like the board decks are like everything that's going wrong, and the company is like, beating the socks off its plan, and, incredible performance. And so how do we actually instead talk about, like, what's going to come next, because things are actually going so well. And I agree with Stefan's points on, on the diversity piece, getting people who are experts in what you need now, and also realizing that will change over time, right? I'm a stage focused investor. So, often we come in and, we're the latest stage person around the table. And then, my goal is that then there are people who join after me who, are very good at building public boards, who are very good at, chairing the audit committee, who are very good at building that comp committee or getting the company ready to be, bought as a premium asset. And so being also really clear from thinking about your board as what are the tools that you need when, right? In the early days, having a seed investor is really, really beneficial, and having that person who can chair your audit committee is not, right? And so, I think also being thoughtful about what you need when and crafting that team so that you're getting the support.
That's great. That's great. Wonderful discussion so far. We've got probably time for one more question before we open the floor to the audience questions. So why don't we look at the latest innovations or trends that people are seeing in the venture finance space, and how these serve early stage and mid stage startups better or differently. And maybe we start with SPACs and that sort of topic, which Stefan knows deeply.
So special purpose acquisition corporation or blank check company is what a SPAC is. And it was a big trend early in the 2000s and then died. And the reason why it died is one of the reasons why we think we're seeing a little bit of a pullback now is that the SPAC is really an interesting type of organization. You're IPOing a company that does nothing. Its sole purpose is you've given it cash, you trust the management of that acquisition company to go find an interesting company to buy. And then it pre-finances them. So it replaces an IPO, essentially. And when the market pulled back, one of the features of a SPAC is, as an investor in a SPAC, it's actually rather nice to put your money in, because if you don't like the acquisition, you can take your money back out of it and you get your money back plus a little bit of interest, a nominal rate of interest. So you're not taking as much of a risk. So as if you were just to jump into an IPO, you get a chance to look at the company and understand it. And so from that standpoint, we saw actually last year more IPOs of SPACs than of any other type of company, than of biotech, more IPOs than any tech company, you name it, more SPAC money basically were out there. What wound up happening is that there were a lot of SPACs chasing a lot of assets, a lot of companies, and there was a lot of competition. And some of the valuations that they were willing to pay were a little bit crazy. And then the way, as Wall Street often does, some of the SPACs were created in such a way that the initial investors did extremely well, no matter what. The SEC decided that they didn't like necessarily the way that all this was happening and the way it was being disclosed. So now the SEC is scrutinizing a lot of these things. So whereas this was very hot, it's not so hot right now. I think we're going to come, it's the swinging pendulum. I think we're going to come back into the middle, and it'll be an opportunity for companies to go public with this type of financing. And I think it creates another route, because for the companies that have, for example, a great VC pedigree, lots of investors, they're going to be able to IPO for the most part. For the companies that didn't take that traditional route, that's where a lot of the SPACs have come in. The other side of that as well is that what was interesting is a lot of the investors, the bigger funds, decided, you know what, we want to control this whole IPO process. We don't want to go out. We want to benefit from the ability to invest early and keep control. They started their own SPACs, these are investment companies, and then found the companies to merge and brought them in, and actually kept a lot of the upside. So those particular groups who did that did actually quite well on those. That type of thing is still continuing. We just saw a SPAC formation announced by a major investor yesterday. Again, we're finding ways to navigate what the SEC wants at this point, and that's why I say it's coming back to the middle. So it stopped for a little bit, now we're coming back to the middle, and I think it offers for a number of firms. And by the way, you may say, well, why are we talking about this at a startup conversation about a startup? Well, some of the companies that were integrated and went public into SPACs were spin-outs from universities only a year prior. So essentially, it was a Series A and then immediate to go public. So that's why I think this has become popular. And because these SPACs are chasing a lot of assets, earlier stage companies are finding they have access to the public markets as a result. And I know it's a lot to have at once because it's actually a rather confusing type of investment when people say, well, why would I want to give money to a bunch of people and trust them to go find companies for me when I could do it myself? But at the same time, it is an interesting way of doing it and keeping some of the upside for yourself if you get in early to these. I will tell you that if you take a look at the performance of the SPACs once they got public, if you asked me that question last year, I would have said, wow, they're just fantastic. You asked me that question this year, and I just ran the numbers last night, and over any SPAC that had an asset that came in over the last year is actually neutral. So the market for their peers has been up a little bit. They're really truly at like zero. If you asked me that a month ago, I would have told you they were down. So it's probably not necessarily the best way of doing things, but at this point, it's definitely offers, because there's so much capital out there still, it's a source that one has to investigate.
So we've had a great discussion here, and SPACs have come up more than once in this discussion. I think we're going to need to hand this back to Lo at Berkeley. Roseanne, do you want to have the final word here before we do?
Oh, I mean, SPACs are super interesting. I think that sometimes companies forget you have to be a public company after them, and you still have to report, and you still have to give guidance and report earnings. And just because it's easier to get out doesn't mean it's easier to be public.
Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you, Stefan. And Lo, back to you.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today online, and thank you to Walter and our panelists for sharing their insights into new venture financing for us today. I learned a ton, found it quite fascinating. We hope you'll join us for future events at Berkeley Ecosystems. You can find us at ecosystems.berkeley.edu. Quick reminder, we will be sending out a post survey for your thoughts and input, and we hope to see you again. And as we of course say in Berkeley, go Bears.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.